wonder how an author finds their voice, writes an entire book, and then gets traditionally published? Well, then you're in luck, because today I sat down with award-winning author Jean Kwok, where she is going to explain to us her entire journey, how she became a writer, the challenges she faced, and what inspired her to keep going after she was told no. So let's get into it. When did you first realize you wanted to be a writer, and what was the turning point that made it a reality?
Well, I think I'm different from a lot of other writers in that I was not one of these people who at 7 years old was like, oh, here's my first novel, and I'm following in my writerly mother's footsteps or my professor English father's footsteps. I grew up really poor. I'm from a real working class immigrant background. And I actually worked in a factory as a child and lived in an apartment in New York without a working central heating system. So believe me, like being a writer was nowhere on my radar. I was just trying to survive. And I loved books. Like books were the most important thing in the world to me, but I never thought I could write a book. I had no encouragement to be creative or to write a book at all. So I kind of grew up trying to escape this life of poverty, and I had like in my sights a real job, like being a person who was not dirt poor was my only goal in life. So I went to college as a physics major, and that was what I wanted to be. And it wasn't until I was there, and I think one night I was up late trying to do a problem set, and I wrote a poem, and I was like, oh my God. I felt like I had laid an egg. I was so shocked by what my hand had written, even though, of course, I had read nonstop for years. I loved books, and they were my refuge and my safety and all of those things. But I just did not realize that you yourself could be the person who wrote books. So it really wasn't until I was an undergraduate at Harvard that I realized maybe I wouldn't be forced to return to the factory. Maybe I could do something creative. And honestly, once I started writing creatively, it was the only thing I wanted to do. So I came to wanting to become a writer really late.
Interesting. I connect a lot with that. I have a very similar story. I'm dyslexic. My mom's dyslexic. Writing, reading is not in our blood whatsoever. So when it came to like growing up in school and stuff like that, books and writing, that was no. Math, nothing. None of that was for me. I was going to go into the arts of some sort, fashion design specifically. And so I had a Shakespeare teacher who showed me how to write a story, and like a light bulb moment went off, and I was like, whoa, wait, I think I could do that. So I very much connect with that. Like it was not in the cards for me originally, but I love your story so much, like in general. It's very beautiful.
It is. I think there's something special about coming to writing late. I mean, I think there's, late, right? There are people who come even later than that. But I was always very envious of those writers who knew from the get-go that they wanted to write and started writing from a really young age. For me, it was pretty hard going, and I had to learn it all consciously as an adult. What did I want to do? What was I doing? How do I do it? And I think that's really shaped my career.
What was the biggest challenge you faced in getting your first book published?
Well, there are a lot of challenges, guys. Getting your first book published is not a piece of cake. I started as an undergraduate in physics, but after I realized I love to write, I switched into English, and I did graduate in English with this idea of becoming a writer and wanting a day job and, really trying to make it as a writer. But I was not very clued in, and I just didn't know to go to conferences. I knew nothing about the business. I was really just kind of blindfolded in the dark, trying to write something. And after working for a couple of years in New York, I actually decided to go back to grad school, and I got my MFA in fiction from Columbia. And while I was a grad student at Columbia, I published a couple of stories. And this sounds like a fairy tale, but trust me, it was not. When I was a grad student, I had published these stories and I got signed by a major agent. So just on my promise as a young writer, not with an actual manuscript and not knowing how to write a novel. And it became very clear that what I had to do was write a novel. That was what was expected of me. I did not know how to write a novel. Like I had just managed to write a short story. I'd started in poetry, so I got to short stories, and then to go to a novel was the next big step. I also had met a Dutch guy, and I moved to the Netherlands. We got married, and I started this whole life where I was not publishing, I was not winning contests. I was just trying to write this novel that I did not know how to write. And it took me a really long time. It took me like 10 years. At the end of those 10 years, when I had written the book once and had to throw almost all of it away, except for like the first 50 pages, I started it again. I sent what I thought was my best shot to my big deal agent, who had really, supported me through the years and been encouraging. And he wrote me an email that had 3 main points in it. And he said, number 1, Jean, there is no market for this book.
Oh,
Then he said, number 2, if you need any help finding a new agent, I'd be happy to give you suggestions. So the book was not only unmarketable, but so bad that he dumped me. Number 3, he said, congratulations on being a mother. So I heard that subtext loud and clear. To say that that was pretty much the most devastating email I'd ever gotten in my life. An understatement. I was living in the Netherlands, a non-English speaking country. I had no writer friends. I had not gone to conferences or anything like that, which I really, really should have done. But I was beyond clueless. So this was the person who knew the most about the world, who was, the person who knew the New York publishing world, who had been my link and my support for all these years. And he was telling me without a doubt that there was absolutely no hope for this manuscript, that I had stayed up like day and night. I had 2 small children at that time. Like I had so little time. I was teaching at the university at the same time. Like I had written this book with blood, sweat, and tears and barely managed to get it done. So I never came closer to giving up than that moment. And I put it away. I reread the manuscript a month later, and I was like, I actually really love this book. And moreover, I don't know how to improve it. Like I had done the best I could, and I really I was absolutely willing to improve it, but I didn't know how. So I decided I would give myself a year to try to find an agent, because I am not independently wealthy. Like I was in a position where I thought, I don't have the luxury of having this as a hobby. I need to make a career as a writer. And if I have no talent and no ability to do that, then I actually need to refocus. And maybe I'll always write for myself, but I can't put this much of my time, energy, and my soul into something that I just can't afford it. Like then I need to really develop my career as, a teacher, as a professor, as something else. But I thought I would give myself a year to see what could happen with this manuscript. And the advice I had been given was, well, as a little writer, which I undoubtedly was, with like a couple of publications under my belt and having disappeared for all these years, as a little writer, you should look for a little agent. You know, a junior agent at a smaller agency is much more likely to give you a positive response. And I thought, well, screw that. I'm not doing that. I just thought I can take being rejected, and that is the only disadvantage of starting at the top. And it's not that I like being rejected, but I thought I would rather be rejected 1,000 times than start at the bottom and get maybe number 5,000 on the agent list. So I thought, all right, just bring it on. And I made a list of the 10 biggest agents in the world. And I thought they're all going to reject me. Then I'll go to the next 10. They'll reject me. And I just thought I'll just keep bumping down until I get to, 2,500 or whoever finally takes me. And so I remember the night I was ready to send it out. This was the same manuscript. I had not changed a word because I didn't know how to fix it. Like I was sure it was flawed, but I thought you pull at one string, the whole darn thing falls apart. So I just was like, I don't know what to do with this. So yeah. I'm just going to go out with it. And I was sitting at my desk. It was 11 p.m. in the Netherlands, which is about 5 p.m. in New York City. And I had a list of the 10 biggest agents in the world. And I looked at the first name on the list and I thought, oh my God, I'm doing this all wrong, like all wrong, because she's so huge and she represents these Pulitzer Prize winning best-selling authors. It's like, there's no way she's going to take a complete unknown out of the slush pile because I had no connections, being a clueless person. I did not have friends that were like, read this book. I was going into the big old slush pile with nothing to recommend me. I thought there's just no way. This is ridiculous. I need to do what everyone told me to do, which is go for a smaller junior agent and pray that somebody takes pity on me. And yet, I had this kind of like massive attack of fear, and my hand was on the mouse. It was like they were e-submissions, e-queries, and somehow I sent the book. Like I just sent the query letter while having this attack. And, of course, it was only the query. It was not the manuscript. It was not anything like that. It was just a one-page query letter. Well, 30 minutes later, her office wrote me to ask for the full. And the next day, I got more requests on Friday for the full manuscript. I got the first offer of representation on Monday. And on Tuesday, I got a phone call from that first agent on my list offering representation, and she is my agent today. So that is the story of how I actually got published. And that same manuscript sold at auction about 3 weeks later in a major deal and sold foreign rights, like I don't remember, to tons of countries. So, that was the beginning of my career.
Wow. If that is not a story for like, don't give up, I don't know what is in the writing world. That is amazing. Your original agent must be like literally like rolling over in a panic attack when that all happened. Like that is amazing. Wow. I'm obsessed with your story right now. That is so cool. And I think that also just shows like there are so many out of the box ways too that like this industry happens, like, how people get published, how people find their agents, like, and there's so many times when you can give up in this industry because you're gonna get knocked down in a variety of ways. Especially like even when the book, you do get your agent, you are going through publishing, you got your developmental edits, you got your line edits, and you got copy edits. There's a few more times you're gonna get a couple punches throughout the whole experience, but wow, that's an amazing story. And I hope people are listening to this and like taking something from that, because yeah, at the end of the day, 1,000 no's or one no, like never stop. If you really truly believe in something. My favorite part is that you didn't change a word of the manuscript though. That's awesome. That's like so sticking to what you truly believed in and what you felt was right for the book.
I mean, that said, I do believe in making changes and in making edits if you know you're going in the right direction. If you're getting really good advice and you feel in your gut, we always feel it. You know, we may not want to do it. I've had a lot of times where I've gotten editorial advice and I've been like, no, no, no. But part of me knows that it's going to make the book better. And when it does that, I am always willing to pull the whole thing apart. And like I said, I threw away most of the book, you know, about 5 years into the process of writing it. And that was extremely painful. But I think there's no substitute for being willing to look at it honestly and to make it as good as you can. I do think that when I look at people who have made it and who have stayed relevant through the years, I do think that resilience and not giving up is almost more important than any type of talent, lack of talent, etc., that you might have. I also think that craft is extremely important, and that the more you know about craft, the better your chances of having a book that's going to succeed in the publishing world, you know, and I'm talking about traditional publishing, which is the world I know. I think that in the end, everyone is looking for a great book, and there is always space for another author and another great book. The issue is being honest enough with yourself and your manuscript that you can look at it and say, you know, I maybe was inspired and maybe I did these things right, but maybe there are things I'm doing that are putting off the gatekeepers, that are having people not go further than my first couple of pages, my first chapter. It's very easy to make some beginner mistakes, or even more advanced mistakes that can stop your manuscript dead. And I think a part of becoming a professional is being open to learning what those are and being willing to fix them.
Absolutely, yes. My very first book I ever wrote is one that the very first draft, no one will ever see that. Ever. You'd have to pay me and send me to the moon. But my second book I wrote is the one that it'll be my debut novel, and I just went through the line edits of it, and it was the most humbling experience ever, because there was especially one comment that I was sticking to my guns on it. I'm like, no, I can't change that. I can't change that. It'll do this, and this. But when I looked at 3 other comments that my editor had, they all connected. And I was like, okay, there's something that's not right here. And I remember literally laying on my floor in my bedroom because I was like at a loss of what to do. My mother walked in and she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, yes, I'm just processing right now. And in that moment, I was like, you know what? There needs to be a whole nother chapter in the middle here, because that's the missing piece. And that way, like, the dominoes can all fall into place and it'll all look pretty. And as soon as I did that and I sent it back to her and I asked her what she thought, we both were like, that was it. Like, it was that moment. And I'm so glad I did that. Otherwise, it would not have been good. So, yes, definitely change it when you're ready to change.
Well, Haley Grace, I mean, huge congratulations to you. That is such a momentous, amazing thing to have your book about ready to go into the world. And I will say about edits, you know, I think I really went through that with the first story I published, where as maybe it's just me, but like as an unpublished author, I kind of felt like every word I'd written was sacred. And I really had gone over the manuscript 100 million times. It's not like I just threw it off and it was my best shot. But when I published for the first time, the editor, you know, really took pencil to paper and did some massive edits to the proposed edits to the manuscript. And I got them back and I was like freaking out because I was like, oh, but this is different. Like, I don't know what to do. This is different. And then I had a professor at Columbia and I showed them to her and she looked at them and she kind of blurted out, you know, before editing herself. Like, I could tell like she hadn't actually meant to say it. And she was like, but these edits are so much better than the original. And I was like, oh, oh, okay. Oh, well, maybe that's right. Like, all right. I'm kind of like, I was kind of very in love with what I had written, especially because I'd written it. And I had spent so much time, kind of invested in it and going over it word by word. And I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe it is much better what she did and suggested. And that kind of opened up my mind to being edited. And that is something that as a professional, we all are edited, and we are all edited pretty intensively. And many times, I would say 90 something percent of the time, it makes the book better.
Yes.
But what I do say, one piece of advice I do give writers is we're all writing for a reason, right? And we are all writing for a reason that really, I think, doesn't have to do with fame and money. There are a lot easier ways to have fame and money than to become a writer. So we are writing because we've got a passionate fire inside us that is making us write a particular manuscript. And that reason might be something we really can't articulate. That reason might be something we never actually articulate, but it's still there and it's burning inside us. And that is the reason we have to write that book. And I think that it's very important to keep whatever that spark is alive. So you can make massive changes to the book and they will improve them. But whatever is at the heart of you needing to write that book, that must stay intact, because I think that it's much better to have like a living, vibrant, flawed, alive creature than a corpse, like a kind of Frankenstein that's perfectly proportioned on the page, but is not alive in any way. So that's what I say, is try to test that against your own gut feeling. Are the changes something that maybe bring your book further in what you hoped it would be, in, the reason you wrote it, or are they taking it too far away from whatever it was that made you want to write this book?
Your books like Leftover Women and Searching for Sylvie Lee have such compelling, layered storytelling. How has your writing process evolved from your debut novel to now?
Well, I think one thing that I've definitely learned and developed through the books I've written is I have a much greater knowledge of craft than I did with my debut novel. I think my debut novel was really just kind of winging it. And of course, I had read for many, many years, and I was very serious about writing. But things like understanding structure, thinking about pacing, thinking about the ways you fit various points of view together. Those are all things that I have developed in the writing process and in working with top editors. I think that's one of the great things about being an author, is that you are trained on the job, because every time you get edits in, every time you get criticism, you learn how to do it just a little bit better. So, for example, my first novel, when I wrote it, I was inspired and I wrote it, but I had not plotted out the timeline. I had not plotted out the seasons. I had not plotted out day by day. And I think that's fine for a first draft, but as I'm sure you know from having gone through edits and copy edits, it is so going to come back and bite you. So it's like, if you do not nail down exactly what you're doing before you hand it in, it's fine to write it intuitively, but then there comes a point where, for me, I really need to figure out exactly when did this happen, because what will happen is your editor will come with something like, I really need to see more of the mother-daughter relationship. Do you think you can add in a couple of scenes? You do that. And what happens is that it messes up your timeline. So when you have things like the next day, the next morning, a week later, you can wind up having her go to work on a Sunday, for example, because even if you had figured it out originally, but because you added this stuff that happened the afternoon later or the next morning, it just can screw up your entire fictional world. And it's one of the things I've learned, or things like just, what are they wearing? is the season? How old are they? If I have had a certain amount of time pass, how old is everyone in the scene versus at the beginning of the book? So those sound really mechanical, but they are huge issues that will make you want to kill yourself if you are in copy blitz and the book cannot be published because you have some really big mistake in there that you did not realize. So craft is something I've learned a lot of, and I'm also a full-time professional writer, which was my dream from when I started working. And so I cannot take 10 years plus to write a book. I am under 2 different book contracts right now. In fact, I'm under contract for 4 books, a trilogy and another one. So it's not that I need to really churn them out, but I need to be working at a really consistent rate, and I cannot waste my time. So a part of what I've learned to do is just a lot of structure and craft and practical things that help me function as a full-time professional.
Having a roadmap and even like a sketch of the room, like if you have multiple characters going on, draw a little box for yourself, like show yourself where the characters are. I completely agree. There was one area when I was going back and editing that I totally realized in part of my story happens all in 24 hours. And I realized that this whole day would have taken like 36 if it was in an actuality. And I was like, we have to like look at this.
I really do plot everything out. I plot it out. I mean, a lot of times I do it after I've written. So I feel like the whole pantser plotter thing isn't really right because you can write it however you want. I do think that it's easier if at least you have an idea of where you're going when you start. It requires fewer changes later down the road. But I think that for me, the most important thing is actually going back and looking at what I've done and understanding exactly what I've done and making sure that everything I did was a deliberate choice. So that if I am deviating from, let's say, standard 3-act structure, I am deviating for a reason that is good and that is valid and that doesn't hurt my book in the end. But I plot on a macro level. So I plot in terms of years. I will really look and see how old everyone is. I will know when they got married. I will know when they were born. I will know when they went to college, even if it never appears in the book. And then I also plot on a day-to-day level. So I have a Google Calendar that I use to plot exactly what happened on which day, especially if I write, one of the things I write is literary suspense. And sometimes if you have a big twist, I need to make sure it actually works, that even though nobody is probably going to plot it out the way I'm plotting it out, I need to go back and make sure that what I'm saying happened really did happen, could have happened, and is not contradicting real life.
What's one piece of advice you wish to give to another author?
I think a general piece of advice nowadays is that I think the publishing world is changing very quickly. That things that used to work are not working. Not to be Debbie Downer, I just think that there is a reality to what is happening in our world and in the publishing world. That does not mean we are doomed. To the contrary, there are great writers and great readers and books that are doing brilliantly. But I do think that there are a lot of changes, and that going back to what we said earlier, in general, I think that you are not doing your book a service if it's really slow. I think that things need to move quicker than they did. That does not mean they need to move at a breakneck pace. I mean, absolutely not. We need to care. We need to have characters. We need to have voice. We need to have all of those things. But I am very aware when I am writing my books of getting the reader interested immediately. I am aware of the reader's experience from beginning to end. I don't think that takes away from what I do as an artist. I think that many times we have the feeling that to be a true artist, we have to not care what anyone thinks. I think if you want to publish and you want to also have a career as a professional, you need to be aware of the reader experience. And that doesn't take away at all from your influence as an artist. It's just about making choices and not making them like, it's almost like a conversation where I don't want to have a conversation that's just a monologue and where I'm only thinking about myself. I feel like my books are a dialogue with the reader, and I'm very aware that the reader is there, and I want the reader to be invested. I don't want the reader to put my book down. I want my reader to stay up all night reading my book. And there are craft things you can do to do that. There are artistic things you can do to do that. And those are choices that I make really deliberately.
So that's just so true too, especially like in just the grand scheme of the world right now. I feel like on the social media side, which is, my main zone, they always talk about those first 3 seconds. How do you grip the person in that video in 3 seconds? And I can see that in writing as you're talking about that.
That's fascinating. I mean, that you see, that's the thing I know less about social media, but that's so true. When you say that, I'm like, oh, of course, that's so true. And there's so many things like that that are not obvious until someone says them to you, where, I've maybe learned a lot through the years about things you need to do in the first chapter, and mistakes that I've seen people make in the opening of their books. But that's a different thing from being able to lay it out in points so that you're like, okay, so I know I'm doing all of this stuff intuitively. How do I make it conscious? How do I look back, and how can I be open to saying, I wrote this, I loved it, I still love it, but it may not be the strongest it can be. And in fact, for my work, for sure, it's never the strongest it can be. I mean, I rip apart my own work all the time, constantly. Tons and tons of pages, storylines, characters just get thrown out because I will not move forward unless it's my absolute strongest shot. And I think it's hard to be a writer. It's hard to get people's attention in this day and age. And I will not let something go out unless I really believe I can't do any better than what I've done.
No, that's a very, very good advice and very good feedback. There was a character I wrote in my very first book ever, and I kind of put it down for a long time, and then I recently picked it back up, and I'm doing that, doing the ripping the pages out, and there's one character that I read him and I was like, he's really not doing anything. He's really not contributing. I love him and I absolutely love this character, but I was like, we gotta take him out. It's the hardest thing to do though, because you're like emotionally invested in them. I feel like I had to have like a grieving day afterwards. I was like, okay, where's my Oreos? Where's my TV? Like, give me a minute.
Yeah, I mean, you love them. You don't want to cut them. You've done a ton of work. And there are also times when you rip something out and the whole darn thing falls apart. And you're like, it's whole thing's like in pieces. And if I hadn't done that, it would be like an integral work. But my advice is, if you know it's going to be better and you know something is not working, you've got to rip it out. Rip it out, look at it later, and you will find a new way to patch it together. It will come together better than you ever imagined. Our unconscious is so powerful. Our writing minds are so powerful. But I have had many, many, many moments of panic where I'm like, what did I do? It was fine. I had a draft and now I have nothing. I have this stuff that's pulling in a million different directions because I ripped out a character or a storyline that I really knew was not as strong as it could be, but it has always been the right thing to do.
At the Kaua'i Writers Conference, what's the key lesson you hope to share with aspiring authors?
Well, the class I'm teaching at the Kaua'i Writers Conference is called Advanced Narrative Design. And what we do in that class is my group is hopefully made up of people who are really serious about publishing with a traditional publisher and who may have run up against gatekeepers, where either at the level of getting an agent or at the level of getting a book deal or at the level of feeling like their careers have stalled and they want to move past that. So I am not teaching like feel inspired and do what you've been doing thing. I am teaching a class that says, look honestly and clearly at what you're doing and how can it be better. So I ask I require a work sample and a letter of intent because I don't want to make anyone really unhappy. If someone is kind of exploring what they're doing and just want to be encouraged and move forward, I am not the right class. Like my class is very positive, but it is about taking a good hard look at what you're doing or what you intend to do. Like sometimes it's even better if you don't have a manuscript yet and you're working on the next book in progress, because then you can really start from a clean place and looking at it and saying, what do I need to do? What are things that could make this something very, very powerful if I were to publish it? How could I write something that's going to take my career to the next level and get me past whatever hurdle I might have run into? And the truth is, we all run into hurdles, even at the highest level, we run into hurdles. And it's using craft and being open to taking apart what you've done and being willing to improve it, whatever the cost. So my advice, I think, in general to students of writing is that be open, be open to looking at your work, and while keeping the flame of your intention intact, be open to reconsidering the choices you might have made unconsciously, make them consciously, and I think you can be amazed at what that does to your manuscript.
There is something so beautiful about hard truth. So I would love your class because I love someone to be brutally honest with me. That's why I give anything I ever write to my dad, because love him dearly, but he's going to give it to me. Like he will tell me what is wrong with it. And I love him for that, because without that, we don't need a pat on the back. You need to tell me what I need to fix, because that's the way you learn. So I would love your class, and I'll be hopping around. So you'll see me. I'll come in there with my little camera and be like, hi. But that's awesome.
That's right. I think that's great. And I think, it's not about being negative. And we don't actually workshop any of the manuscripts in the class.
Okay.
But I give material, I give questions, I talk about things that we talked about today, like things that you need to do. I'm saying need loosely. I'm giving people tools that they can apply if they wish to their manuscript, so that they can hopefully create something much stronger. And if they have been getting no's at some point of the process, that those no's can turn to a yes. And no one can guarantee that for you, but it requires a willingness to look at it very honestly and openly, which I do all the time to my own work, and to say, all right, well, I thought I was doing this. Maybe I'm not doing that as well as I could. And maybe I'm making these mistakes.
Okay, so tell us, what are you working on now? Can you give us a little sneak peek into the future?
Well, I am under contract for 2 books. One is actually a romantasy that is coming out next year in 2026. It's called Dominion. And it is about a young woman with amnesia who becomes a tiger rider. And it's like a cross between Fourth Wing and the Hunger Games. And the other book I'm writing is a literary suspense. And it is a murder set at Harvard. It's basically a cross between Pride and Prejudice and Rebecca set at Harvard. So that's those are the 2 things I'm working on right now.
Okay, I'm unbelievably excited. I'm absolutely obsessed with romantasy. Anyone who's ever seen my stuff, like, I genuinely, it's a true problem right now. Like, I'm a huge romantasy girl, and growing up, my dream was to go to Harvard. So, like, you just said two of my favorite things. So,
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, I love romantasy as well. I mean, I loved it before it had a name. I loved it when it was just like fantasy romance. It was the thing I always loved to read. So it's a real joy to be able to actually write one for Putnam. It's a trilogy. So the first book should be coming out next year.
amazing. That's so cool. I'm so excited to see it and to read it. Congratulations on all of your success, and just you are such an inspiration to so many writers. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time to do this interview with me today. I really appreciate it.
Haley Grace, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.